Welcome back to 20 Sided Adventures. My name's Ryan. This is Sorcerer 401, where we talk about which archetypes best augment your sorcerer's playstyle, and this is assuming a free archetype style game. If you are not playing free archetype, these still might be worthwhile takes if they help you augment a build that you're really passionate about, and we're going to go through and talk about my favorite archetypes. With over 115 archetypes, there are so many to choose from. I'm probably not going to hit them all, but these are just my personal favorites. As always, if you like what we're doing here on the channel, please leave a like and subscribe down below. Pushing for that 1,000 by year's end, and we're doing great. Appreciate all of your guys' support. Speaking of support, easiest way to support the channel, leave a comment down below. I do love chatting with you all about Pathfinder. And if you're interested in session recaps and what goes on at my table, check out my Substack, link in the description, where I do little novella-style write-ups of my players' antics. With no further ado, let's get into Sorcerer 401. Here we are on the first choice for archetypes on the Sorcerer, and I think this one's a really fun one to play with, especially when you're leaning into the bloodlines, and that is Cathartic magic. Now, interesting thing about Cathartic magic is it can also just be kind of an alternate rule system. So if you look here, there's some additional rules on Cathartic magic, specifically about how to roleplay around it. So if you're running a campaign, perhaps in another plane or an area where things are chaotic and emotions might be spiking and changing and having a bigger draw on your players, you can lean in and have some of these Cathartic magic effects happen simply because of the environment and the emotions around them. There's some advice here for game masters wanting to use Cathartic magic outside of the archetype, as well as you can offer it to your players as kind of a bonus to maybe something that's happened or a side effect. Just be very careful when you're specifically leaning into it for that regard, because you are toying with your player character's emotions a little bit, giving them some powers around it, and then also, using it as more specifically strings than just the story itself to tug and pull at things. So in that regard, use Cathartic magic with care. If you are a player looking to take Cathartic magic as an archetype, I will say this is one that might even be a decent choice in a non-free archetype game if you really enjoy it. And in a free archetype game, I think it gives you a lot of breadth to a spontaneous caster. It does have a special note up here on the right. This won't make a lot of sense till we get a little further down in it, but some Cathartic effects require an emotional focus, be it a nemesis, a true love, someone around you that just inspires a great deal of emotion, and it cautions you that if you're making your Cathartic focus another PC, which some of the effects kind of require it to be, to do so with caution, talk it through with your fellow player character, and make sure everyone is cool at the table that you are doing that. So Cathartic Mage dedication, charisma 14, or the ability to cast spells from spell slots. So if you're not a caster, you can take this to get some spell casting as part of your repertoire, and I think this is a great one for a class that isn't a spellcaster, but for a sorcerer, I think it's a great take as well, as I've already mentioned. Essentially, if you don't cast spells, you get some cantrips. If you do cast spells, rather than gaining a whole new spellcast entry, at least at this first juncture, you get to add an additional cantrip to your known repertoire. So just giving you some more options as a spontaneous caster. This grants you the catharsis reaction, which allows you to turn on all of the effects of this archetype. Once that trigger has happened, it also gives you a settle emotions activity, which takes 10 minutes, kind of like refocusing. At 4, if you're not a spellcasting class, you can gain basic spellcasting benefits, which if you're unfamiliar with that, we're going to jump over here because you could take this as well to just give yourself some more casting options. If you wanted it as a existing spellcaster, you would essentially create a second amount of spells slots and charges and known spells to go alongside your spell casting. This basically says you gain a first rank spot and you learn a spell with it. So you gain one slot, learn one spell. So it does just give you a little bit extra casting. This will be several levels behind your primary casting class, so putting some utility spells in these lower level spots might be the call of the day, as you will be using higher level spots generally to impact the primary events of your adventure. If you are moving through, say, an adventure path where you're needing lots of resources and you're finding you're just running out of spells in general at low levels, this might be a good way just to augment that a little bit. So at 4, you can take that basic spellcasting, give yourself a couple extra spell charges and known spells separate from your normal repertoire, Or if you're already a spellcaster, you can gain access to the focus spell granted by your Cathartic type, which we'll get into that a little bit later. There is no level 6, so you could either take both of these as you're leveling up or leave this available for something else. So at 8, you can work yourself up as a 2 action, and this allows you to take your catharsis reaction without having the trigger. So if you're just not getting the trigger happening enough and you want to get into your cathartic mage state, this is a great feat to just let you do that on demand. It does take 2 actions. At 12, you can up your spell casting, or if you're not needing the spell slots, you can take this one, which is Infectious Emotions. When you use your catharsis, one ally within 30 feet gains the catharsis activation benefit in addition to you. So not only are you getting the benefit, you can share it with someone else. This benefit does require an emotional focus. So as it kind of talked about up above, if make sure who's your focus and make sure everyone's cool with that. This does also state some of the activations are just impossible to grant to others, so you just have to kind of play with that. So make sure you know what your catharsis ability is, chat with your game master, and make sure it's going to be cool sharing it with someone else in the group. And then at 18, master cathartic spellcasting. So not a lot in this archetype. If you're using free archetype, really easy to grab other things around it. If you aren't in a free archetype game because there aren't a lot of feats, but you gain the benefits of it, this is why it can be a reasonable dip for someone who is interested in this playstyle. So we're going to go through what the different emotional states you could choose are. And this gives you just a quick little thing to read, what your reaction is triggered by, the benefit of when you activate it, the fervor of what happens for the 3 rounds while you're in it, the fallout for what happens after the 3 rounds of your catharsis, and then the focus spells that you can gain with this archetype. Anger. Your catharsis is triggered when an enemy deals damage to you. You can't use this reaction if you're fatigued. If you are grabbed, immobilized, or restrained, you can attempt to escape, and if you succeed, the creature or hazard imposing the condition on you takes force damage equal to your level. So you just get so mad, you're pent up, you take your reaction from the damage, and you get to burst out of that grab. When you are in your fervored state, whenever you cast a spell from your spell slots, so not a wand, not a staff, and the spell deals damage but doesn't have a duration, you gain a status bonus to the spell's damage equal to your spell level. So for 3 rounds, you're just getting a straight damage bonus to any offensive spell you're casting as long as it doesn't have a damage over time effect. While you are in your emotional fervor, you may now also cast the Draw Ire spell from the Arcane or Occult list, whether you have that list or not. And the interesting thing about these spells is they can basically be cast at any spell level available to you or any spell rank. So if they rank up, you can use your highest level spell rank to cast these spells if they are of interest to you. After the 3 rounds, you become fatigued until you take that 10-minute activity to settle your emotions. So just a little bit of a debuff on this one for a pretty decent damage output. And then you can pretty much only do it once per fight because if you're fatigued, you can't do it again as above. So you can't just keep spamming this cycle. And then for a focus spell, you can gain Athletic Rush. You can choose Awe as your emotion. Whenever you or an ally within 30 feet critically succeeds on an attack or a roll against the AC or a skill check of an enemy's DC, so basically someone does something cool, you can go into an awe-inspired state and activate your catharsis. If you're fascinated or stupefied, you can attempt to re-roll the save again to remove it. When you cast a spell, choose one creature that was hit by your spell attack roll or that failed a saving throw. That creature becomes fascinated until the end of your next turn, and it's temporarily immune for 1 hour. So fascination's an tough one to sometimes use in combat, so you just have to be very careful of that because any offensive activity removes the fascination. But if the next action is the person that has been fascinated and they're fascinated, so now they can't cast their spells or do anything with the concentration trait, it can be tactically used. You just need to be in the right place in the initiative order to get the most from it. You also gain glitter dust when you're in this state. When you come out of your emotional fervor, you are flat-footed for the remainder of the encounter until you settle your emotions. So pretty solid -2, just being open to sneak attacks, all of those kind of things that come with flat-footed, so just be careful with that. Aha, I guess off guard because this hasn't been updated yet. Man, how easy I fall into pre-remastered jargon. Focus spell is Dazzling Flash, if it is of interest to you. Dedication. So this one's pretty interesting. You have to have an emotional focus, and your emotion is just being dedicated to that person, whatever it may be. When your emotional focus takes damage from an enemy while you are within 30 feet of them, you can enter your cathartic state. Your emotional focus gains a number of temporary hit points equal to half your level rounded up. These temporary hit points last for 1 minute. So you're just giving that person a little bit of extra juice when you get upset about them being hit. In your fervor state, your spells that target your focus benefit from the reach spell, so they can move further away from you, or if it was once a touch spell, it can now be up to 30 feet. And when you're casting a healing spell that affects your emotional focus, your emotional focus also gains temporary hit points equal to the level in addition to the spell's effect. So they've got temporary hit points from you just being upset about them. You're reaching out and healing them with spells at a longer range. They're gaining temporary hit points on top of the healing. And you can also cast the Spirit Link spell when you're in your fervor. Now here's the trick. Once you've gone into Fallout, you can't cast spells unless you're adjacent to your emotional focus. So if it's gone more than those 3 fights, you need to be next to that person to be able to muster any of your spell casting. And your focus spell is Protect or Sacrifice. So here's an interesting thing that kind of ran through my mind on this. I think the easiest way to go is, oh, I feel great love or empathy or, a bond with this person. I got to heal them and keep them alive. No. You're playing a healing sorc that you hate this person in your party so much, but no one else gets to kill them but you. So you're going to do everything you can to keep them alive. I think that'd be a hilarious spin on this. Fear. So you let your fear fuel your magic. It triggers when you become frightened, and it has to be an enemy that makes you frightened, which I think is really important. You increase your frightened value by 1 to a maximum of +4. So when you activate it, you're making your frightened penalty worse. Why would you want that? Here's why. You do not take the status penalty from the frightened condition when you are in your catharsis. Instead, you get a bonus equal to your frightened condition. So if you just got frightened 3 from just a dragon aura that is terrifying, you then activate your fervor, it goes to 4. Well, now you're getting a +4 on your spell attack rolls and your spell DCs. And it's not done yet. Your foe takes the same status penalty to their saving throws against your spells. Now, it doesn't say their AC for spell attacks, but if it's a saving throw, you're getting, in this wild scenario, a +4 to your spell effects on your DCs. They're getting a -4 to their will save. This is an 8-point spread. That is massive. So what's the downside? Well, when you fall out, you're now fleeing for 2 rounds. So if you haven't finished this fight in 3 rounds, you're gone for the next 2, and your party's just going to have to make do without you. But that's it. You get to come back. Spell you can cast is Fear when you're in your fervor here, and then you also gain the Waking Nightmare Focus spell. Hatred. You just hate your enemy, and an enemy has to be your emotional focus for this to work. You start your first turn in an encounter against an emotional focus or one of their followers. So this one you have to be real careful with. If you hate the big bad evil guy and you're not doing a lot about them, you're just never going to get to trigger this. When you activate it, you can step or stride as a free action, and you must end this movement closer to your emotional focus, so you need to move towards whatever you are upset about. They are off guard to you and take a -2 penalty to saves against your spells, but you are also off guard to them and take a -2 to your saves against spells that they might have. So you just have this, you're easier to hit, but so am I. You get the Blood Vendetta spell. When you fall out, after those 3 rounds, you become stunned 2, so you're going to be kind of useless for that 4th round. And then you get the focus spell Cry of Destruction. Joy, your unbridled enthusiasm and positive attitude can lead you to success. So you're just that way too cheery and the glass is always half full person. When you critically succeed an attack roll or a save, or an enemy critically fails to save against you, you get to trigger this. You reduce the value of your frightened or stupefied condition by 1 and end any persistent mental damage you have. So those are all pretty solid, especially if you can share them with your bonded person in this case. If you took that, you gain a +1 bonus to performance checks and to the spell attack rolls of emotion spells, and enemies take a -1 penalty to their saves against emotion spells. So a lot of things with Catharsis is you're getting a +1, but they're also getting a -1. So there's a lot of this just pulling apart even more, making you that much more effective. You can cast Hideous Laughter. At the end, you become fatigued until you settle your emotions. So that's pretty straightforward. Just being that upbeat is exhausting. I think Joy is a fantastic take for the Bard, obviously, because also for the performance checks. But you could build a sorcerer around this that is pretty interesting. And then Focus Spell is Unimpeded Stride. Love, you're joined by the bonds of love and nothing can break that. But love can distract you from other things in your life. Your emotional focus is someone you are in love with. They aren't required to love you back. So again, if you're going to use this at your table with another party member, make sure everybody's cool. Your emotional focus takes damage from an enemy while you're within 30 feet of them, so very similar. If you or your emotional focus is confused or controlled, one of you can attempt a new saving throw against the confuse or the control effect. If you are both eligible, however, there is a specific note here that your emotional focus gets to make it. You gain a +1 bonus on will saves while you're in your fervor, and if you cast a spell to benefit your emotional focus, this bonus is increased to +3. So while you're helping your love out, you get better will saves. So fairly decent. When you fall out, you are fascinated by your love for 1 whole minute. The downside of this, folks, fascinated doesn't let you concentrate. So you are not casting anymore for this fight unless your true love takes some hostile action against you, which that's just getting messy, folks. So be careful with this one. If the fight's not over in 3 rounds, you are no longer casting. Misery. This is the opposite of joy. To suffer is to know that you are alive. To make your enemies suffer as greatly as you eases your suffering. So the trigger is you gain persistent damage. You gain a number of temporary hit points equal to your level. And then in your fervor, you can choose not to attempt flat checks to end any persistent damage you're taking. So when you're doing damaging spells, you get to pick one person, even if it's an AoE, and you're going to tack on some extra persistent damage while you choose to continue your own suffering. You gain the Phantom Pain spell, and when you fall out, you take an untyped penalty to any damage you deal equal to the spell level that you're casting. So after those 3 rounds, you're just going to be taking a damage penalty to any damage you're dishing out. Your focus spell is Savor the Sting. Pride. All is well as long as you appear well. When you critically fail on an attack roll or a saving throw, your catharsis effect is it becomes a failure instead. Each time you cast an illusion spell until the start of your next turn, any critical failure on your roll or an attack roll or a saving throw is a failure instead. I don't know how many illusion spells I'm really rocking, so I don't know if I'd be really jazzed about this one, but if you have a illusion-based sorcerer build, Pride could be an excellent way to go. At the end of it, you become confused for 1 round. You are granted Color Spray as a spell to cast in your catharsis, and you gain the Veil of Confidence focus spell. Remorse is the last one. You are racked with guilt. An ally within 30 feet of you drops to 0 hit points. Hopefully you're not triggering this too often. You step or stride, and you must end your movement closer to the triggering ally. Any spell you cast that restores hit points to the triggering ally gets a status bonus to the hit points healed equal to the spell's level, or double the spell's level if the ally is at 0 hit points. Could be a pretty interesting way to build a healing sorcerer. Spell you gain is Warrior's Regret. When you are in your emotional fallout, the weight crushes you, leaving you stupefied 2 until you settle your emotions, which as a caster, stupefied 2 could be pretty rough. And you gain the focus spell, Healer's Blessings. I'm not going to go through all of these in depth because I think they're fairly straightforward, but if you're leaning into being a familiar sorcerer, familiar master is an excellent way to just have that familiar, lean into boosting them up without giving up a lot of sorcerer's slots. Ritualist, if you're interested in doing rituals, taking Ritualist as any spellcaster is an excellent way to boost your ability to knock out some awesome rituals. Field Propagandist, this could be a very fun one from Battlecry, since you're leaning into deception and diplomacy in this archetype. Having your key stat being charisma, this can be a great take for you. The other great thing about the Field Propagandist is there's a lot of single action takes in here, so you can cast a spell and then use these single action activities and weave that into a basic round of combat for you. An excellent one for that, I think, is level 6, the Invented Vulnerability. Once per round, you can list off potential fears and weaknesses of an enemy you can see or hear, speaking with such certainty that they become real. Attempt a deception check against the enemy's will save, selecting bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing damage. Regardless of the result, the target is temporarily immune to the invented vulnerability for 10 minutes. The target gains a weakness, so you're implying a weakness that the rest of your party can take advantage of, and there's plenty of spells that deal bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage that you can then lean into, especially with your cantrips if it's just trying to mow through some of the mooks in the encounter a little bit easier. I think this is a fantastic synergy with the Sorcerer. If you want a full breakdown of this, I did a video on it when Battlecry came out, so check that out. But I think this is a great archetype to take with really any spellcaster, but especially Sorcerer because you're leaning in with Charisma, or the Bard would work as well, I think. Hallowed Necromancer, so this is if you're leaning into being a little bit more on the healing side of things and more of a religious focus to your sorcerer. You gain the Hallowed Ground focus spell. It is worth noting if you take this archetype, you do pick up an anathema, where you're not supposed to be helping out the undead, so do be aware of that. At 4, you can add some more focus spells to your spell repertoire. You could also take sacred spells here, where it gives you more options to your potential spell list. And these spells have a little bit more flexibility. For example, if you're a spontaneous spellcaster with signature spell class feature, add 2 of the spells from this list of the sacred spells to your repertoire. They are signature spells for you in addition to your normal signature spells. So this is a great way to add them to your normal spell list and make them signature without having to have a secondary casting stat with this particular archetype. So a great way to just have more flexibility in your spellcasting. At 6, some resistant to negative damage. 8, you have more domain spells that you can take, just increasing your focus spell repertoire. At 14, which is the next big one, you can get a consecrated aura where you radiate positive energy, which if you're fighting lots of undead is going to give you basically a fear aura against the undead. Oatia skysage, which this one is a uncommon from a very specific area. So make sure your GM is fine with you taking this. It's going to give you an additional spontaneous spell casting that is going to be very divination focused. So if that's something of interest to your sorcerer, to just have more spells to gain insight from the world around you, could be pretty cool. So as you scroll here, 4 is your basic spell slots for it. You could also increase to low light or dark vision if you're an ancestry that doesn't grant those. At 6, you can get some domain spell options. You just have more breadth in your focus spell casting. Minor Omen at 8 is a great reaction to re-roll a failed reflex save, or a failed occultism or lore check at 8 if you're doing a very studious style play. Could be really useful. 10, you're getting more spell slots for that secondary repertoire. 10, you could take Know-It-All. You also have at 10 some innate spell casting at your disposal. Same at 12, some more focus spells to potentially take. And then Night's Warning is a pretty interesting one at 14. It's a reaction, and instead of targeting your AC, which is probably garbage as a sorcerer, they get to target your occultism DC instead. So 10 plus your occultism modifier should make you pretty robust. Some other interesting things this also does, this does allow you to avoid any penalties to your AC you're also currently suffering. So if something's reducing your AC, those don't affect your occultism DC, such as being flanked or off guard. However, they still get the benefits of you being off guard, just the AC penalty in it does not apply to you. So this is a good way to make your sorcerer a little tougher for the rare instances maybe that they are in the thick of things. Speaking of starlight armor, you harness the light of the stars to cover yourself in an armor where you gain resistance 7 to piercing, bludgeoning, and slashing damage, and it also sheds bright light in 20 feet. So while not true armor, you are getting yourself some damage reduction, which is pretty cool on a sorcerer because you probably don't get those very often. And then at 16 is the master archetype spellcasting if you did just want a second list of spells. Runescarred I thought was kind of a fun route to possibly go with a sorcerer, where you are just covered in these scars of magical inscriptions. So basically, when you take the archetype, you become an expert in Arcana, which is pretty cool. And then you also get a scar on your body that when you activate it, you cast 1 cantrip from the arcane spell list, and it's treated as an innate spell. Unlike other spellcasting archetypes where you follow the spellcasting archetype rules, this one gives you innate spells that just go on your list based on different rune scars that are across your body. And I just think there's a lot of fun ways to play with that, how you're carving magic into yourself to gain it later. At 6, I think this one is awesome, getting a second rune slot. So essentially you carve a rune into your flesh and you get to have an armor rune slot on your person that does work in addition to some armor. Pretty robust way just to increase the defense on a casting sorcerer. Warding rune hasn't been updated. You would get a +2 on a School of Magic. I might just grant it to a type of magic now. So arcane, primal, divine, maybe. That might be too robust. You could always kind of work it backwards too and kind of figure out. And then at 10, you get some higher level runes carved into your body for casting spells. Lastly, spell trickster, which I think is pretty cool. If you note the fruits of research over here, which my little bubble here is covering up, but this says basically as a GM, if you want to reward your players who are leaning into magical study and grant them trickster feat options rather than making them take the dedication, that you should keep that in your toolbox as an interesting reward for casters that are doing that. I am not going to go through all of these feats because there's so many on spell trickster, but essentially every feat lets you modify how a basic spell works. So this one changes how mage hand works. This one changes how shield works. This one changes mage hand to a different effect. This one changes the light spell. Summon Ensemble changes Summon Instrument. Tracing Sigil changes Sigil. Dancing Lights, Animate Rope, Mirror Image, and they all just modify how those spells normally work. This archetype is also really interesting, where when you take it, you get 2 free level 4 feats to modify your spells. So you could just hand out free feats to your players as the reward mentioned on the right here. It would not be outside the realm of possibility. I would also say, if you are at a table that likes being creative and your players are pretty good about understanding the rules, if you had a player doing research that wanted to make their own spell trickster modification, I would let people at my table do it if that was built into the character, they were spending downtime on it, and it would be a fun thing for your players. And just follow suit here, seeing what other spells are doing. Like that first one I think I mentioned with Mage Hand lets the Mage Hand use Thieves' Tools to let you pick locks with Mage Hand. So what else could you maybe come up with how to modify Mage Hand? Things like that. I think that'd be a lot of fun at your table. Some archetypes I didn't put in here that I think would work for the Sorcerer. There's plenty that have synergy with bloodlines. So like the Harrow archetype would go if you took the Harrow bloodline. There's a Draconic Disciple or Exemplar. I can't remember what it said, but there's a Draconic archetype where you just lean into being a dragon. If you also have the Draconic bloodline, maybe marrying those two together makes a lot of sense. So I didn't jump into that, but if you can find archetypes that lean into your bloodline, I think that's cool character building and builds a lot of great story. So there you guys go. Cathartic Mage is probably my favorite take. Runescarred is probably my second. I think those are both fantastic, fun ways to play a sorcerer if you're using free archetype. If you're not using free archetype, as always, dip into archetypes carefully. I never was a fan of multi-classing in first edition. I just felt the sacrifices of your class features weren't worth it. And I feel a lot of times in 2E, without free archetype, dipping into an archetype is oftentimes not worth giving up the normal class feats for it. But there you guys go. This is Sorcerer 401. If we get some new Sorcerer Bloodline stuff from the Draconic book coming out next month, we'll do an addition to this series and come back to it and kind of check in on those changes. So with that, as always, if you like what we're doing here on the channel, please leave a like and a subscribe. The easiest way to support the channel, leave a comment, and I'm going to wish you a fantastic time on your 20-sided adventures. We'll catch you next time.